Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. This is the Dragon's Breath Bow Wow, welcoming you back to another episode of Archon's Adversaries, Incinerated Heavens, the next part in our Blood Pact campaign of the Cabal group. So, as usual, slightly different campaign for this one, but let's get right into it. Very, very quick recap, because I realized that the last recap was literally a half an hour, so apologies for that, that's a long one. But just to go through, we are focusing upon the Sabbat Worlds Crusade, not the one that they wrote books about, the one that preceded it, Nadzibar's Crusade. My crusade, because of course on this channel, I am the Archon Nadzibar. So, my crusade goes out of the Sanguinary Worlds, essentially a multi-pronged, multi-cult chaos alliance that moves out of this Imperial backwater subsector and essentially breaks like a summer storm upon the rest of the Sabbat Worlds, taking over several adjoining subsectors and using different spearheads to break into many others. One of those that we've chosen to leave until now is the Cabal group, this central circular one right here. It is one of the heavily defended sections of the Sabbat Worlds, and as a result, kind of the castle from which the Imperial defenses have been holding for a serious period of time. In our last video, we went over one of my magisters, Enoch Inakenti, managing to sneak onto the world of Enothis by pretending to be a rogue trader with food supplies for the embattled subsector. He managed to land at the primary city of Enothopolis, the northern hive here on the map, demarked with a lovely little chaos star now, and the invasion of that early move, that first kind of assault ambush attack, and then the appearance of the rest of the chaotic fleet, using Enoch's deceptive fleet as kind of a beacon for their warp jump, led to the first Battle of Enothopolis, a kind of middling ambush/onslaught that was an overall close chaos victory. A mix of really hundreds of thousands of Chaos cultists and Blood Pact troops managing to push away and push out the large number of Space Marines who were holding the Hive, causing pretty heavy losses on both sides. As it currently stands, Chaos forces hold roughly 3/4 of the northern hive of Enothopolis, with the White Scars and some thousands of enforcers holding the Spire, tenuously, and the southern wall, also fairly tenuously. In orbit, however, there's a completely different situation. The Chaos fleet and the remaining Marine vessels are now moving to do battle with one another, and that will be the main focus of our first battle video. We have not done a Navy fight, an actual detailed Navy fight on adversaries before, so let's give this little experimental section a shot. Now, we have ranks and sides. Who is what and where are they? We have the forces on the planet side of the Chaos forces, so down here in the corner is Enothis. Those include some of the orbital weapons of Enothopolis that have been controlled and essentially have been stolen by the Blood Pact and other troops. They've gained control of the ground side orbital weapons, and given that there are two hives, there are two sets of orbital weapons, so they effectively control half of the orbital firepower available to the planet of Enothis. Then, in addition, within the planet's atmosphere, or basically within high orbit, you have the fake rogue trader ship, which is an Ambition-class cruiser, and a Sword-class escort. Those were the only armed vessels that managed to make it to the planet itself. Then in between them, the ones by the planet, and the incoming Chaos fleet, you have the Marine fleet, essentially the defense fleet for Enothis. And they also have some limited orbital support because, of course, the Trinity hives, the southern hives, have their own orbital weapons, which are still on the side of the Loyalists. So this is one of those scenarios where I've drawn a red and blue dotted line to indicate the maximum range of the orbital defenses, because half of them are in the hands of Chaos and half of them are in the hands of the Loyalists, which paints a pretty interesting situation because the Chaos fleet that is inside of the upper atmosphere, they can't leave without being targeted by the other ground fire, but the Marines also can't get too close to the planet because they'll get targeted by Chaos ground fire. It's a very interesting little catch-22 scenario that we'll see how is dealt with in this conflict. For the other parts of the Imperial naval forces, there are 3 Vanguard-class light cruisers. If you don't know anything about the Vanguard class, I've done Navy videos, so all of these are up on my channel, but the Vanguard class are essentially the only light cruisers that Space Marines have access to. They come in 3 different flavors or variants, but all of them boast a frontal launch bay or kind of aircraft bay, and then some broadside weapons of tier 2, which means relatively analogous to a cruiser rather than an escort, but they are still relatively small, relatively light, and they lack an armored prow. In addition to those, they have 3 Marine Nova frigates. Now, do not get confused. Nova frigates do not have Nova cannons. Nova frigates have a single heavy lance weapon at the very front. So they're kind of like a space-based sniper rifle. They're very small, very light, and designed for extreme long-range engagement. Similarly, the other 2 Imperial Navy ships that are acting as escorts for the area are 2 Firestorm escorts. Now, the Firestorms and the Nova frigates essentially are almost the same in terms of quality of weaponry. They both have fixed forward heavy lance weapons, whereas the Vanguard classes have a mix of lance weapons and macro weapons. All of the escorts on the Imperial side are entirely long-range precision lance weapons, mostly because it was expected that any vessels that came to this area would be in small numbers or just be very small vessels in general, meaning that heavy macro weapons wouldn't really be necessary. Then for the external Chaos forces, those folks coming along with the rest of the Chaos reinforcements, essentially with NOCAD and with Enoch's back line, include the flagship of the fleet, the Incarnadine. The Incarnadine is Nadzibar's flagship, taken from some of the forges to the south in the Irani's group, I believe Kilgrave specifically. It has been finished by Blood Pact Smiths and essentially finished up and readied for the battlefield, and it's technically making its debut deployment with this fight. It is an Apocalypse-class battleship, the largest capital ship on the field, and arguably the only true capital ship, unless you want to count the cruiser. The main focus of the Incarnadine is extreme long range. It has some of the heaviest firepower, and almost all of it is in lance weapons. It has lance weapons on the dorsal. It has a mix of weapons on the dorsal, but at least some of them are lance weapons. And then it has 3 sets of tier 3 broadside lance weapons. So those are all extremely long range, extremely high power, extremely high armor penetrating. But the other thing is that's not even technically its primary armament. Its primary armament is its fixed forward weapon. The fixed forward weapon for the Apocalypse class battleship is a Nova cannon. Now, Nova cannons, if you're not aware, are the biggest guns in 40k. They are basically without an equivalent in any other mainline vessel, no matter what version of anything they are. They can break the backs of escorts. They can crush a lot of other smaller vessels. They can have fallout strikes that actually destroy smaller vessels in their wake. They fire an incredibly large kinetic shell that detonates, shredding through shields and destroying armor. But they take a very long time to load, and of course the main problem is that you need to aim the whole ship towards the target in order to get an effective hit. And even hitting something like a light cruiser, it'll decimate the shielding, but it probably won't do any damage if the vessel still has all of its shield up. In addition to the Incarnadine, we have the Fetid Ossa, which is a light cruiser. Specifically, it's a Hellbringer. Hellbringer has a combo of macro cannons and a flexible macro cannon, kind of a bombardment cannon, similar to what some of the Vanguard light cruisers have. These are very similar, like in equivalence in how they're used. The Fetid Ossa, this Hellbringer, has the same type of aircraft accommodations that the Vanguard does. Actually, arguably, it's a little bit better, but very similar. There's going to be Space Marine flyers coming out of the Fetid Ossa that are from the Dark Tusks warband. And then of the escorts for the Chaos Fleet, you have 2 Havoc-class escorts, which are pretty similar to a sword. They're just a little bit slower, a little bit less maneuverable. And then one of the Possessed escorts, in this case, of course, it is a Nurglite Possessed escort, something that's just going to be very, very tough, and will have a shorter range kind of warp lash ability that we'll go into during the battle. And in addition to that, just kind of fleshing out that escort half of the fleet, there are 4 armed freighters. Now, armed freighters are not very dangerous. They are equipped with a single flexible weapon. So while they're effective at knocking down enemies' shields and dueling with other escorts, even against something like the Nova frigates or the Firestorm escorts. Once their shields go down, they are significantly underpowered in comparison. So they have dubious combat value on their own, but there are 4 of them in this case, so we've set up the field. The Marines are down here in the corner, the Chaos fleet with the Incarnadine in it is up top, and then Inothis is down here in the corner. So, let's go right into the fight. This fight starts off incredibly slowly for a naval combat. You gotta remember, they're covering tens of thousands of miles every couple of minutes with these vessels coming out of the warp. So the Chaos forces appear, the Imperial forces start to maneuver, and the Marines have a little bit of an advantage because the Chaos forces take some time to reorganize their assemblage in space and to communicate with the forces on the ground, see what the situation is. So the Marines are the first one to actually make a move in this combat. And they choose to split drag. Now, split drag essentially means that one of the light cruisers is going to go one direction, the other 2 are going to pincer maneuver. In this way, again, we have one group, one of the light cruisers and one of the escorts for each of the chapters present. Specifically, the group that are Silver Guards are here in purple. Their main Vanguard light cruiser pulls off to the right, heading towards Inothis itself. Throughout this battle, it's going to spend all of its time and all of its effort launching aircraft to assist with the main force, and then also trying to evacuate and transit material and information from the surface of Inothis back up to orbit. The idea is essentially that they want to get whatever Marines, whatever equipment, whatever wounded, or whatever important things are still on the planet, because of course, this is a planet where Marines are commonly deployed, meaning that things might be stored here that they don't want to lose, which they could well lose if Chaos is successful here. Gene seed repositories, for example. Chapter relics, for example. Wounded, venerable brother dreadnoughts who are still in construction or getting dealt with that need to be evacuated so that they aren't stuck on this planet. And they're able to do so. The Chaos fleet on Inothis doesn't bother actually going out to meet them. Instead, they choose to stay within high orbit and loft some shells up or assist with anti-aircraft ability to prevent any of the Marine flyers from really coming in and interfering with the fight in the city itself. So, that part of the fleet, the home side of the Chaos fleet, is essentially going to be distracted by this move, and they won't join the rest of the battle. But this split drag also decreases the amount of force that the Marines can really bring to bear against the actual Chaos fleet. Now they are down at least one light cruiser as they try and do a pincer maneuver towards the escorts and the light cruiser. So they're making a calculated risk for sure, and they're certainly not fighting to the death in this scenario. That's not really something that they have the capability of doing. The enemy has the capital ship advantage, they have the cruiser advantage on them, and they also have the escort advantage on them. So in every single possible scenario here, the Marines are trying to limit damage and maximize the effectiveness of their flight. So, that's the start of the fight. One of the cruisers heads to the right to go and troll over outside of the orbital range to communicate and transfer things with Inothis itself. One of the other cruisers goes slightly more to the right to hook around the fleet, the Chaos fleet, assuming that they're going to come directly at them, which they do. And then the other one takes the other side, going left around the same pincer maneuver. In between them, there is that line of escorts. Now, that line of escorts, like I said, is all based around long-range lance firepower, meaning that there's absolutely no advantage to them actually getting close to this fight. And you can see from the outline of their movements that they don't. They essentially travel line abreast until they get to a certain point, they spread out, they put face towards the enemy, and they simply light them up with lance weapons. While the actual cruisers that have broadside weapons, in this case they're light cruisers, they go in closer to join in a more active conflict. So, what does the Chaos Force do in response? Because of course they see the Marines doing this, they have to make their response. Well, there are two parts to it. The first one is, what does the Incarnadine do? And pretty obviously, it opens with its heaviest weaponry. I've marked here the two locations where its Nova cannon actually fires from. The first shot occurs essentially immediately when the vessel itself is ready to fire. It fires a single massive Nova Cannon shell that smashes into one of the Imperial escorts and knocks its shields out immediately before the entirety of the Incarnadine heaves to, turns sideways, and begins opening up with its lance weapons. Throughout this fight, the Incarnadine is basically going to do absolutely nothing except slowly travel along this line, stopping periodically to drop its lance weapons and fire a massive broadside of lasers at whatever vessel currently doesn't have its shields up. The goal with the Incarnadine is to essentially be kill-confirming artillery. Anytime that one of the escorts or the light cruiser managed to knock out one of the escorts or a light cruiser's shields on the Loyalist side, the Incarnadine is essentially called in to confirm the kill. And because it's a full broadside battleship lance cannon, it can effectively insta-jib or cripple escorts if they don't have their shields up. But the Nova Cannon is simply an opening move as a means of, let's say, psychological warfare. One of the escorts is already down shields, it must already fall out of formation in order to attempt to regain those shields, and the long-range firepower of the Loyalists is momentarily decreased as that vessel has to fall out of line. What then do the rest of the Chaos Forces do? Well, they form the Death Ball. The Death Ball, in this case, is a very simple thing. Much like the line of battle, which is common for Imperial vessels, the Chaos vessels have found a slightly different way of doing this. In this case, these are a mix of Vahedwalk and Guttathraka vessels, so they are much more piratical in nature. The Blood Pact at this point don't have an extremely extensive navy. They simply have essentially poached the Incarnadine to be a flagship. They don't really have a ton of fleshed out navy. They rely upon the Guttathraka and the Vahedwalk, their fellow cults, in order to help them with that, these career pirates. But these career pirates know how to fight against the Imperials, and so they come together, the light cruiser leading, followed by all of those other escorts and armed freighters. They head down kind of in a long straight line. They want to minimize the amount of firepower that they receive. All of it, for the most part, goes directly to the Fetid Ossa, and then right behind it is the possessed escort. Both of them can take a significant beating, both because there are Marines aboard, and also due to the fact that they are pretty heavily corrupted by Nurgle. So they tank several different layers of lances, and also a significant amount of firepower from aircraft. However, once they get to the point where they are even with the light cruisers, they begin the Death Ball. The Death Ball is very simple. What happens is the light cruiser is in dead center of the formation, and then the escorts circle around it. Literally as if one vessel were traveling in a single circle, and then all of the other escorts are orbiting it. How does this help them? Well, with the central light cruiser, a lot of firepower is going to be directed at it, which means that vessels nearby will be able to target the same targets that it is currently shooting at. This way, the light cruiser is able to hit at significantly more firepower advantage, and the enemies having to choose to split their fire between the orbiting escorts, which can always hide in the lee or in the shadow of the light cruiser, or trying to burst down this light cruiser. Now again, they do have a disadvantage, but they also have the major disadvantage on the Loyalist side of constantly being under fire from the Incarnadine. So, the Death Ball occurs. It gets into organization, that force splits up, and they start rotating around like a space-bound buzzsaw. And it pretty much does its job. The Silver Guards cruiser, the one that had been intending to just be a transfer stage, had gone to the right side and traveled just along the orbital edge. It has been receiving significant combined fire, not just from the planet, but also from the cruiser and the light escort that are in its orbit. Essentially, the Chaos Fleet is still able to fire at that vessel when the orbital weapons aren't able to. So, at a moment when its shields are down, the secondary shot from the Nova Cannon at the very end of the Incarnadine's movement comes in and cripples its engine. So that Loyalist light cruiser is crippled, and it is forced to land. It takes pretty significant damage on the landing side of things, so while it drops down to the Trinity Hives, it does manage to make it there, but it takes significantly more damage in doing so. So it is prevented from fleeing this combat, and it will be essentially ground-bound, or possibly just low atmosphere-bound, because of the significant damage done to it by the Nova Cannon, and then by the subsequent ground fire. Then the battle, so to speak, goes as follows. The two light cruisers that had managed to flank either side of the Death Ball have to deal with the problem that they're facing the Death Ball. They are able to knock out several of the Imperial, or of the Chaos vessels, a lot of the escorts, but it's very, very hard to put the Fetid Asa out of position, and due to the fact that it has so many other vessels to hide behind, the other allied escorts don't have nearly enough firepower to actually put down their opposite number in the Chaos line. They do knock out several of them, but eventually, in order to save the light cruisers from suffering the same fate as the Silver Guard's light cruiser, as the Incarnadine starts to turn and try and zero its Nova cannon on the next light cruiser in line, essentially, they both peel off from the fight, followed by their escorts, what few of them have managed to survive, and they have an emergency warp jump, getting themselves out of the combat as quickly as possible. So, pretty short, bloody fight. The Marines do about as good as they can. They make a nice tactical, careful decision between 3 separate chapters. That's actually quite impressive that they came to a real decision that quickly. But the losses are fairly significant. 3 of the 5 Loyalist escorts, both of the Firestorms and 1 of the Novas, are knocked out in this combat. Initially, they are crippled, 1 is captured, and then 2 others are destroyed outright. Obviously, the Silver Guard's light cruiser is crippled, its engines are destroyed, its warp drive is significantly damaged, and it cannot effectively get off-planet, grounding it for the moment, or probably for the rest of the engagement, most likely. On the Chaos side, 2 of the armed freighters are destroyed, likely by light cruisers or a mix of aircraft damage and light cruisers. The Death Ball precludes a lot of aircraft use because of the significant amount of anti-aircraft fire offered by like about 6 escorts and then the light cruiser itself and its own protective aircraft screen. The Demon Escort as well is destroyed. In this case scenario, it is tanking a lot of damage in comparison to the Fetid Asa, which has become infinitely more corrupted as the Dark Tusks become far more consumed by Nurgle. This escort is not a cruiser, though, and it doesn't have nearly the amount of size needed, and it is eventually picked apart by a mix of aircraft and the lances from the Nova frigates. So, the Chaos Forces lose 3 ships, the Loyalists lose 3.5, kind of. It's a pretty even fight. Again, nobody really has capital ships other than the Incarnadine, so knocking out large vessels like cruisers is quite difficult in this short period of time. So, I would argue this is roughly a Pyrrhic victory, or perhaps a strategic or tactical victory, because Chaos Forces achieve what they need, and they lose minimal other vessels, but they don't gain a whole ton, maybe one ship that they might be able to capture in future. However, while this is occurring, at the night rather this is occurring, a whole hell of a lot is going on under the incinerated sky. Even as the orbital war goes on above Enothis in the evening sky, the Chaos Forces begin a 3-pronged attack. We are splitting back up to keep the momentum going. The remaining 50 or so White Scars who have managed to survive our first video perform a beautiful tactical retreat, sabotaging much of the spire, blowing it up, destroying electronics, pulling out materiel and manpower that is needed to keep the city running. And they pull back under severe pressure. They have significant reinforcements from the Chaos Forces coming down basically hour by hour from the reinforcement fleet. Not to mention the fact that they were already significantly outnumbered inside the hive itself, and they were only stopped slightly by passage of time. Essentially a momentary pause, and then the force en large begins flooding back in again. The remaining enforcers, the humans who were left behind, are slaughtered, most of them in heroic last stands, or are forced to surrender to Chaos Forces. You gotta remember, these enforcers are not PDF troops. They're not even that lower bar of soldier. They are genuinely about as close to peacetime officers or policemen as you're likely to find within the Imperium. They're on a planet that is policed by the Adeptus Astartes. They're not heavily armed, they're certainly not trained for open warfare. If anything, they are barely even genuine police officers, and certainly very, very far from the riot police or Arbites that we would normally see assisting planetary defense forces. So a lot of them are slaughtered to the last man, those who choose to hold out within the spire, and those who also choose to hold out just within the city itself. Others, realizing the fact that they are so horrifyingly outgunned and also outskilled by the Chaos Forces, just surrender, lay down their arms, and are taken as prisoners for the most part. The Marines, this is the White Scars again, they head north, mostly in aircraft, though a few of them do commandeer some watercraft as well. They take up positions in the small city of Ingeborg, to the north of Enothopolis, across the Sea of Ezra. We'll be talking a lot about the Sea of Ezra. The Marines transfer as much equipment and gear as they can orbitally. Now, some of this stuff goes from the falling ship to the ships that are fleeing, the very important stuff. However, a lot of things that they were trying to transfer out of Enothopolis essentially got caught in transit. Because that Silver Guard cruiser got brought down, it got crippled before it could jump into the warp. A lot of the gear that they were mass transiting out of the hives basically went down with the ship. And while the ship is in dry dock, that equipment hasn't been destroyed or lost, it is not going to be escaping this war zone that easily. So, the forces for Chaos divide as follows. Once the entirety of the hive is solidly taken, there are no more White Scars around, the Enforcers are down on their last legs, unable to really resist, we break up into thirds. There's the Blood Pact under Enoch and Nikenti. Again, most of these leaders are personally here in charge of their own units. Enoch and Nikenti has the Blood Pact trying to conquer the Spire, or he has them take the Spire, and then prepare to strike north over the Sea of Ezra. Essentially, his goal is the northern area, where the White Scars escape to, and where many of the Iron Snakes are already deployed. He has, under his command, and we'll be looking at him in the next couple of videos, 40,000 Paxsuns, so those Imperial Guard or plus standard Chaos Troopers, 2,000 of the Death Brigadiers, the more elite Tempestus Scion level equipped troops. He's bringing all 100 of the 132mm short-tubed artillery guns, so he's got all of the artillery support. He's got a good number of elite and, pretty much elite and hyper-elite units with him. And then he's using everything that he can commandeer from the city of Enothopolis itself. He's taken civilian aircraft, he's taken Chaos transit aircraft, he's also stolen a lot of Enforcer watercraft, think things like PT boats, and some civilian watercraft as well, like speedboats or transit or cargo ships. And then in addition, he's also taken some military aircraft from the fleet. So he's really trying to secure himself the maximum elite force. He's got the Paxsuns, he's got the Brigs, he's got artillery support, he's got air transit, water support, and air support. Trying to basically quadruple layer the amount of firepower that he can effectively bring against his enemy, because he knows that the Space Marines have access to their own vehicles, their own artillery, their own aircraft. He wants to have the ability to counter all of those things. So, he leaves behind him a solid other group of forces that have to deal with the things that he has taken for himself. We have the Vahedwalk, who are going to be one of our main focuses for this video, under Rushek Vakim. Their goal, or rather their orders, are to push south quickly. Essentially, during that night, during the low tide, they need to attempt to reach and surround the Trinity hives. Now, they don't have a lot of assets with them. They've taken a couple of sets of civilian boats, but it is not nearly enough to transit the 120,000 cultists that they have with them. Over 100,000 cultists is a significant force, but most of them are moving at the speed of foot. However, they have been picked to be the freshest ones. Essentially, these are the cultists who are part of the Vahedwalk, who weren't necessarily in direct part of the first day's assault. So they've either come back or come down with the rest of the fleet for this night attack, or they were just in back areas and now they've been collected and sent up to be an assault group. And their goal is to pass over this low tide isthmus, kind of a land bridge between the northern hive of Enothopolis and the southern hive of the Trinity hives in basically the middle of the Sea of Ezra. It's 10-ish miles roughly for them to march overnight, so they start sometime around like 10 o'clock and they're going to get into combat around midnight. Then for our last group, we have the Gutta Thraka under Nokad the Blighted / Nokad the Smiling. We have the Dark Tusks under Ratan Morose. And the goal of these folks, this kind of mass combined force, is to join with the Fallback Force, which is the group of individuals who have come from orbit, essentially the reinforcements that have come in with the rest of the fleet. and also the orbital reserves, those folks who were part of the initial fight and are now kind of having a break, essentially, so that they can regain their strength and sleep for the night for the next day's offensive. Their goal is to secure the rest of the hive at Enothopolis. Yes, the victory has been won. Yes, we have cleared out the Space Marines, but that doesn't mean that we've cleared out every single little piece of resistance or corner of the hive. In order for us to effectively restart this place and begin a more effective and profitable production of war materials and equipment, also just to preserve law and order, there needs to be a large deployment of individuals down here just to get the hive running and keeping it running, not to mention the Marines are wily, and if they try to directly attack this area, we need a significant fallback force to protect it. And so, remaining at the hive at Enothopolis and clearing it out, you have 400 Loxodal, basically the rest of the brood that were initially with the combat, and then some that have come down from orbit, kind of filling out their numbers. On top of that, another 100,000 cultists. These are a mix of the Guttathraka and the Vehedwak cultists. And they're essentially a mix of those who were exhausted from the combat, some of the injured and wounded, and then the fresh ones that came down from orbit. In addition to that, they have kind of what's remaining of the Pact forces that aren't going to be going with Enoch himself. Roughly 9,000 mixed Pact sons, brigadiers, Kimura, and other officers. This is going to be the most elite forces remaining in Enothopolis. Pretty important group that's going to be dealing with a lot of the actual firepower and some of the discipline. In case they ran across Marines, this and the Loxodal is who they would rely on. And then in addition to that, 50 Dark Tusk Marines. The Dark Tusks are going to take a little bit of time to get around in this fight. They lack a lot of the lighter or more mobile vehicles that Marines usually have, so they're relying much more heavily on aircraft. And since a lot of their aircraft are currently with the Fetid Asa up in the night sky fighting the Imperials, they're kind of sticking around the hive, just making sure that there aren't any of their cousins laying in wait for other forces. So, let's focus on one of these trios for the moment. The Battle of the Isthmus, specifically the southern isthmus in the Sea of Ezra. Rushek Vakim and his cultists grab some cheap civilian boats and the rest of his cultists, and they go along an isthmus at low tide, essentially, in the pre-dawn darkness, where they meet a rapid reaction force of Iron Snakes and Silver Guards, who hold a small village area to stop easy access to the Trinity Hives, which the Silver Guards are preparing for siege. Now again, the Silver Guards have the largest population of Marines still on the world. They have 70 plus of them, whereas the Iron Snakes had less than 50 at this point, or somewhere around 50, and the White Scars are also down to 50. So 175 all told, if no other ones transited from the vessels that were up in orbit. The time that this engagement happens, it's around 3 a.m., midnight to 3 a.m. So they march for a couple of hours along the isthmus, they get to roughly the middle point of it, and then they engage with this group of Space Marines at this central village, kind of a raised area. If you remember like what a land bridge looks like, pretty similar to that. Again, it's only like a 10-mile hike, so cultists managed to make their way along, and they're fighting with 120,000 of the Vehedwak cultists. Again, a mix of ones who are coming from the seaside and ones who are coming from the land. Vast majority of them are coming from the land side. And they're fighting up against 20 Iron Snakes and 30 Silver Guards. So, again, a quick reaction force. What could realistically be brought by a couple of Rhinos over this terrain, and then maybe 1 or 2 Thunderhawks. The engagements. Well, the first engagement is pretty much obvious. It's pre-dawn darkness. These cultists are seeing via a mix of flashlights, flares, torches, and other means of artificial vision. Some of them do have night vision, whether it's natural, chaos-imbued, or technological, but it's very limited. Less than 1 in 1,000 is likely to have this, and they will be leading their own groups. So kind of just picking out areas along the shore to go and where to avoid, and especially those in the sea craft will have a little bit better vision because they have the ability to bring along things like night vision, binoculars, long-range flares that they can shoot, etc. But the open approach of the cultists is kind of problematic because they've reached a very tight point in this isthmus, an area where it doesn't really exceed over 100 feet of sand and large rocks. So this means that they are pretty heavily bottlenecked. They can barely fit a couple hundred men into every section of this, which means that they are moving in rank by rank, very tightly jostling up against one another in the dark. The Marines have no such problems, and they are able to very quickly pick out and start saturating areas of the beach that the cultists are having to go through. Now, the cultists, it's the middle of the night. They have no idea where the enemy is engaging them from. They essentially just see a bunch of bolter flashes, the crack of weapons in the far distance, and roughly about 500 to 600 meters away, the enemy starts engaging at them. Now again, the Marines at this point, at this range, do not have any individual accuracy, but their enemies are so bunched up that they can simply open fire on an area, and they can saturate it with bolt rounds. They're easily hitting 2 to 3 cultists per round, assuming it doesn't just go off into the sea. So, quite effective. They're able to saturate and suppress these units, causing them to drop in many cases and begin shuffling or crawling up the beach, and they have one hell of a beating zone to get to. Now, the boats, on the other hand, have less of a difficulty, but they have more of a difficulty figuring out where to land. Several times they have to slow down to try and identify where the Marines are. The Silver Guard are in dark purple and black, and even though the Ithacan Iron Snakes are in white, they have taken up pretty solid cover behind the position that the Silver Guards are in. They are not engaging at long range. They have set up their own engagement position on the actual coastline where they expect there to be some sort of naval engagement, which is mostly because it's an easy place to land, there's less rocks, it's more of a beach. And they've identified that fairly well, so they are sitting and letting the Silver Guards essentially deal with the overarching group of cultists coming down the throat of the isthmus. So, the fight for those cultists kind of goes about like this. After the initial engagement, the initial bit of fire, they identify where the Marines are, they see where they're coming from, they see where they're firing from, they find ways to trickle along through. Most of them either go through the east side, where they pass through a bunch of rocky outcroppings, a bunch of relative cover that, while it's still getting blasted with heavy bolter fire and stalker bolter fire in some cases, it is giving them some relative cover, at least visually, from the Marines. The Marines have night vision, they can still identify where the cultists are, but hitting them low to the ground, crawling in the surf, the sand, and between these rocks, it becomes very hard to actually knock them out, so they're able to push all the way up to here, which is roughly about 250 meters from the Marines, a much more reasonable shot for a cultist to make, and so this group begins to make their stand there. They pull up between two large boulders. They begin mounting what few heavy weapons they have. Most of them are light stubbers and things of this nature, but most of them simply rack up and start emptying with autoguns at the enemy. The autoguns that the Headwalker are using are not really all that bad. They're certainly very capable as far as fully automatic weapons go, but at 250 meters, and in the dark no less, they're having a very difficult time identifying and managing to get an effective hit on these Marines who have had time to dig in and get themselves some solid entrenchments. Now, it's nothing fancy, it's no concrete, but it is definitely stone walls and waist-deep trenches for the Marines, giving them the ability to duck down and prevent them from being hit by heavy weapons fire. So while the goal of this initial kind of right-side engagement is to act as suppressive fire, all it really does is allow them to engage with that group once more and make it very, very difficult for them to push any further over open ground. However, there is another side to this. The folks on the left side, or on the west side, push along the water itself, literally, in some cases, crawling through almost 200 plus meters of wet sand and mud, some of them even managing to go into the water and trying to swim with their gear on down towards this beach. Now, there's a ridgeline here that protects them from about half of the Silver Guard's fire, and from their visual fire as well. But as they get to this point, about 100 meters distant from the Marine position, they come under contact again. One of the squads of the Marines has canted, found a secondary area of fire, set up, and prepared for the cultists to cross this section. They do so, and absolute pandemonium breaks out. A bunch of them basically death charge towards this position, thinking that they have flanked the Marines' position, and they sprint 20, 30, 40, 50 meters, and then they hit roughly a chest-high or head-high sand berm. They set up on that, and they wait to see more and more cultists begin racking up on this position. So a little group of cultists is starting to kind of permeate in this area, and this is when the folks on the beach, the folks who are from the ocean side, select that as a landing position. So, in these positions, on this one here, the kind of stymied defensive front on the right side, you have maybe about 30,000 cultists, again, in a big old V on this section. Then on the other side, you have roughly, again, 40,000-ish. A lot more are coming in from the isthmus itself and haven't joined either group. But over here, you have another roughly 2 to 3K who have not engaged yet. They drop down on the beach. All 45,000 basically of these troops rush the Marine positions. Problem: the moment that they actually manage to get ashore and get a significant mass of cultists onto this beach, the first goal is to run around a big old rock, essentially a small boulder, and get into the Marines' position so that they can flank them again. The idea not wanting to jump the Marine positions that they're already defending, they want to find a way around them with as many men as possible. There's a big problem with that. On top of the fact that there's a 50 Marine overwatch essentially covering this section of beach, you also have the Iron Snakes. The Iron Snakes have selected the same exact thing that the cultists have. They saw it as a very easy area for landing. The Iron Snakes saw it as a very easy area for landing, and they prepared accordingly. As the cultists make their push, some of them trying to jump through the Marine overwatch, others trying to run around the boulder, they run smack dab into 20 Iron Snakes. Now, it's not just 20 Iron Snakes. If it was just 20 Iron Snakes, this could have been a different engagement. Unfortunately, this Fratry group has something else with it. This quick reaction force was not just a knee-jerk decision. This includes Brother Captain Phaeus of the Iron Snakes 9th Company. Wielding both Lightning Claw and Power Sword, the Brother Captain is not in the mood to be overrun by, 20,000 screaming Vahedwalk cultists, and he and 20 of his brothers proceed to absolutely obliterate the entire force that comes around the side of the bolter. Again, it's very early dawn, it's still dark, and so out of the darkness comes the horrifying sound of chain swords, storm bolters, lightning claws, and, in some cases, other much nastier weapons like Ithacan harpoons being thrown through multiple cultists and then ripped back out again. Now, if the cultists had not been under heavy suppressive fire this entire time, had not been mixed up from their naval invasion, their D-Day-esque landing, and had not been afraid of the noises in the dark and not being aware of how many enemies they're facing, 40,000 of them could have been a significant thing to swallow for 20 Marines. But in the darkness, and with their morale already partially broken, it takes a very short time from Captain Phaeus revealing himself until the force that is going around the rock, the one that is furthest from the Marines' position, to break. This results in a pretty expected domino effect. The group that had been charging the Silver Guards and had been effectively working their way up that position, yes, grinding men into dust, but also pushing the Silver Guards back as they are forced to go into a more small, more contained area to focus their firepower and conserve ammunition in some cases. But with this initial assault from the cultists around the big rock to the left-south, they fold up as well and they head back. The Marines then join together to use what range firepower they have to suppress and to harry this group as it heads backwards. And in normal forces, in a normal Chaos Force, this would be all that it really took for a legitimate rout. However, this is the Vahedwalk, and they are pretty well versed in the idea of go, get beat, get back up, start again. So, they do so. They manage to get themselves reorganized, roughly even with their first suppressive position, and they are ready for another push within only a short period of time. The Marines are not going to come out of their defensive position in order to go chasing these cultists in the dark, where they might get overwhelmed, because of course, they've only faced about half of the actual unit so far. However, then another saving grace comes in for them. air support. A low-running Thunderhawk, avoiding the anti-aircraft and the air patrols that the Blood Pact and Chaos Forces have already set up, drops along the isthmus and does 3 solid bomb and gun runs along this entire cultist line. They are so tightly packed and so organized and ready for their essentially move to the next assault, and in some cases digging in on this right side, that bombs, las cannon hits, and bolter arrays from the Thunderhawk are able to break them up. And within a very short period of time, that final push that they had planned simply disintegrates. Vakeem, knowing that brevity is the soul, or not brevity is the soul of wit, but rather that, conscientiousness is the best part of any plan, pulls himself back along the isthmus and slowly organizes a retreat, essentially prepping and calling in for aircraft to get rid of the Thunderhawk, and pulling his men back slowly, some of them in boats, to make sure that the Marines don't follow them. The Marines, as a result, by morning, hold the isthmus, but barely. If it weren't for that Thunderhawk, this fight would have gone on for several more hours and likely required them to retreat simply for lack of ammunition. So, this area is a complete wreck after this. There's a lot of damage to the area, there's a lot of just empty ammunition casings and dead bodies floating out in the water. And with the bombing of the isthmus, there are sections of it that will definitely still be underwater come low tide next time. And no part of the village that they were defending remains standing, essentially. The Marines, however, have come out of it fairly well. Only 2 brothers have actually died. Most of them have died, the 2 brothers who died were both Iron Snakes. They were in much closer proximity to the cultists. They were against much larger numbers of cultists in close combat than the Silver Guards were, and of course being in close combat exposes them to a lot more dangers with these type of troops. They have weapons that are effectively able to go through weaker spots in their armor, and because they are closer, they have more opportunity to do so. So 2 of them managed to get overwhelmed and killed, and roughly a dozen from the unit overall are wounded, but in exchange for that, they have dispatched over 30,000 cultists in the span of about 4 hours. So in a very short period of time, tens of thousands of men have perished on this isthmus, and the Marines have come away with only 2 killed and a dozen or so wounded. Brother Captain Fayus definitely having a pretty impressive effect on this battle, keeping his phratry in order and preventing the Iron Snakes from making any hot-headed maneuvers that could theoretically have gotten them in much more trouble than he did. His conscientiousness and his willingness to wait and withhold his ambush is likely one of the biggest psychological factors that led to the Vahedwalk overall breaking upon this position and the domino effect down the line. So, concluding, and this has been a good one. I was really happy I could get this out. And by the way, I hope you guys like the new mic. I'm not sure if anybody's able to tell, but I did upgrade my microphone so that my luxuriant and beautiful voice could be more effective for all of you guys. But let's move on. Conclusion and what happens next. Well, the first orbital battle of Enothis, not sure if I have a name for it. If you guys want to come up with a name for that one in the comments, feel free. I have lots of creativity, but I couldn't come up with a name for it. Was a chaotic strategic victory. The Chaos Forces have managed to push off any enemy orbital forces that exist. They have managed to take care of or prevent any enemies in orbit from escaping with too much of the planet's supplies. Some things have escaped world, some things haven't. And so overall, strategic victory. Only a couple of vessels were knocked out. None of the light cruisers were knocked out permanently, though one was crippled. The security of Enothopolis itself, the securing of the hive city from which the Chaos Forces are going to be operating, is definitely a tactical Chaos victory. They didn't manage to snag any more White Scars killed in the engagement, unfortunately. They certainly wanted to. They were going after them in particular, but the White Scars, being aware of that, tactically retreated, escaped, and got themselves out of there. But enforcers were killed, the entirety of the hive itself was secured, and then massive Chaos Forces were brought in to double, triple, quadruple secure it, and to ensure that things would run smoothly in future. In addition to that, there were some minor things with parts of the Spire being sabotaged, but we will look into that next video. Finally, in this one, we had the Battle of the Isthmus. I know, we don't usually get to have 3 battles in a single Adversaries video. Oh, how I spoil you. The Battle of the Isthmus was a close Iron Snake Snake and Silverguard victory. I don't like to use the phrase heroic victory, but this would definitely count as one of those. It's certainly close. I mean, with the low losses, the high effectiveness, the high enemy kill ratio, it would definitely count as a heroic victory. The only reason I call it close is simply because of the fact that it's very likely that they will not be able to pull this again. Because of the engagement, because of the situation that they were in, because of the situational disadvantages that the assaulters had, it's very likely that another similar scenario will not occur. So arguably that's a heroic victory. You could also call it a close victory. 120,000 men versus 50 Marines. Your argument as to which way that's going to go, but I've given you my reasoning there. So, things are going on. Things are occurring. The Pact are heading north, trying to deal with a mix of iron snakes and white scars that have escaped their reach. The Guttathraka, the Thorns of Heaven, have joined up or will join up with the Vahedwalk, our nomad ex-Imperial pirates. They're going to be facing south with their enormous army of hundreds of thousands of men, Marines, Luxatl, and some elite troops that the Pact have lent them. And the Hive itself is also their responsibility. So they're looking south, the Pact are looking north, the Marines are scrambling, trying to deal with this engagement. It's only been roughly a little bit over 24, let's call it 30 hours so far, and there's already been 4 major battles. So yeah, this is a spicy campaign, isn't it? I would love to hear from you guys what happens next. Like I said, this is kind of a canon-adjacent campaign, so when I ask you what happens next, I am going to be putting up votes for things, but those votes will also include, like, I want you to comment what you think should happen next. I want you to comment about what engagements you want to see, what choices might be changed, what forces you want to see highlighted. So it's going to be a big part of that when I put up the votes for you guys. But other than that, let's go here. Again, what happens next, that's up. You guys can comment on it, or I'm going to put up a post in the next couple of days to see if people want to pick some things for it. I'm also going to be having people pick it just so that we can get new videos maybe picked. But let's go on to credits. Credit to GW, of course, to the first Mage Lord for his artwork, Phil Moss, TD Vice, Oniris, Terenzi, Michael Bernat, and Samuel Allen. Whew. Long one. I hope that you guys liked. I hope that you like the new mic setup. I hope it isn't too quiet or too loud or too much of my voice, too little of my voice. The gentleman who I purchased it from said that it was a good mic and that it would work out well for me. It was great for streaming. So yeah, I don't know if I trusted him, but I'll let you guys decide. In either, all, and any cases, I hope that you all enjoyed. And as usual, I wish you all a lovely good night.